Donald Trump is failing in his efforts to prosecute people he has publicly labeled as enemies. At the same time, new photographs connected to Jeffrey Epstein are continuing to emerge. This legal update examines both developments and explains why they are closely connected. I'm Ari Melber, a lawyer and journalist, and in this special weekend update I want to address these two related issues. The failure of Donald Trump to successfully prosecute individuals on his so-called enemies list is an important and often overlooked story. It highlights the limits of presidential power, even within a system that has well-known problems with accountability and government overreach. Another way to understand this is that some guardrails within the system are still functioning. While many people may move on quickly, thinking, for example, that Trump did not manage to go after James Comey and wondering what comes next, this remains a significant development. It is also a story Trump would prefer people to forget, because it shows that his threats do not always succeed. Even failed attempts to prosecute can seriously disrupt people's lives, but repeated failure also exposes the boundaries of power within the current legal framework. A major example is Trump's repeated failure to prosecute New York Attorney General Letitia James. This is now the third unsuccessful attempt, and it represents a significant legal and political setback. Previous analyses have covered this issue, but it is worth revisiting because of what it reveals about the system. Initially, Trump's team lost because they attempted to use temporary or improperly appointed prosecutors to pursue partisan cases against political opponents. These efforts collapsed when courts ruled that key figures involved did not legally hold the authority they claimed. As a result, the first attempt failed outright when the sole prosecutor involved was disqualified and no one else was willing to sign off on what many within the office viewed as an unlawful or baseless case. Legally, prosecutors are allowed to bring a case again, and that is what happened next. However, the second attempt failed when a grand jury rejected the charges. The case was then presented to yet another grand jury, making this the third attempt overall. There is a common saying that a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, and that expression exists for a reason. Most people never see the inside of a grand jury room, and when we hear the word jury, we usually imagine a trial jury, 12 people in a courtroom as portrayed in movies and television. A grand jury, however, comes earlier in the process. The grand jury serves as an initial check on the power of the government. It is a larger group of citizens, operates under a lower standard of evidence, and typically hears only the prosecution side of the case. Because the defense does not participate at this stage, the bar for indictment is relatively low. That is why most cases presented to a grand jury move forward. However, the grand jury exists to prevent the government from bringing cases that completely lack evidence. If prosecutors fail to meet even this low threshold, the grand jury can refuse to indict. That is exactly what has happened here, twice. Two different grand juries rejected the effort to indict Letitia James, which is a notable and embarrassing outcome for those pushing the case. This rejection matters because it demonstrates independence and courage by ordinary citizens. These are not legal experts or political insiders, but regular people performing a civic duty. Despite the natural pressure to go along with prosecutors, they chose not to. This stands in contrast to many powerful institutions and elites, such as leaders in politics, business, universities, and law firms, who have often capitulated quickly when faced with pressure that threatened their careers or financial interests. These grand jurors followed the process, evaluated the evidence presented, and concluded it was insufficient. That shows both that the legal system still requires proper procedures and that citizens can and do act as a meaningful check on abuse of power. Federal agents cannot simply arrest or detain people without following this process, and judges will intervene if procedures are not respected. When tracking the outcomes so far, Trump's efforts to prosecute political opponents have resulted in repeated failures. Counting the cases that have reached critical legal stages, the record stands at 0 successes and multiple losses, with the Letitia James case alone being attempted 3 times. Other cases remain pending, but the broader pattern shows that the enemies list strategy is faltering. Turning to the second topic, the Epstein case continues to evolve. While there were serious failures in accountability in the past, more evidence is now becoming public. Survivors played a key role in pushing for legal changes, leading to new federal legislation that forced greater transparency. This law resulted in multiple judges ruling that grand jury materials from both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell cases should be released. The Epstein estate has also complied with lawful demands for documents, resulting in a large release of emails. These disclosures have had real-world consequences, exposing connections that some individuals had previously tried to minimize or conceal. Among those mentioned in the released materials are figures from politics, academia, and media. More recently, new photographs have emerged, showing Epstein with various high-profile individuals at different times. These images do not by themselves provide full context or explanations, but they contribute to a growing public record. This release of information comes just ahead of a key deadline under the new law, which requires the Department of Justice to release materials with only narrow and clearly defined exceptions, such as protecting survivors and minors. Judges have made clear that these exceptions cannot be used to justify excessive redactions or the withholding of entire documents. As a result, pressure is increasing on the Department of Justice to comply fully and transparently. Taken together, these developments show that while accountability has been delayed and incomplete, the legal process is still capable of producing results. Evidence continues to surface and institutional checks, though imperfect, are functioning in meaningful ways.